Hey everyone, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the Turbo 360 tutorial series. In this series, we're going to build a restaurant website for a sample restaurant, an upscale restaurant that you might take like a business meeting or something like that. And in this website, there's going to be obviously menus, probably a series of images from Instagram, loading comments from the Yelp page, things like that, and yeah, and the ability to update the site without needing programmatic access. So the idea behind this is that this project is more realistic. It's the kind of thing that you should expect to do as a contract developer if you want to be a freelance engineer. And if you follow through the whole video, maybe you should be able to use this in an actual project if you choose to do so. So that's it. So let's get started. So first thing you need to do, as always, is install the right packages. So open up your terminal, and let's make sure we have all the right packages. So we're going to install Gulp first. So make sure you do that. Gulp is a task runner, which we will use shortly. And then we're going to need also Webpack. And then last but not least, we're going to need the Turbo CLI. Now I'm not going to install this because I already have it, but if you already have it too, make sure you have an up-to-date version. So the version that I'm running right now is that. So depending on when you're watching this, make sure you have this version or higher, because there are pretty frequent updates. So if you already have the Turbo CLI, just make sure you have an up-to-date version. And if you don't, just run the install and you should be good to go. So let's go ahead and scaffold the project. So head over to your work directory and we're going to create a new project. And this of course creates a directory, a project directory on your workspace. So it's a Node Express project. So what that means is we should cd into it and install the dependencies by running npm install. And this will install the key dependencies for the project. So while that's going, head over to Turbo 360 and log in if you're not logged in, and sign up if you don't have an account. It is free, so you don't have to worry about that. But we will need this to deploy the project and have a staging environment for hosting. So make sure you have that. So once you've signed up, you should see a dashboard kind of like this. Let's create the project on our Turbo account so that we have our hosting environment. Go ahead and create that. And then grab the app ID. So highlight this app ID and then copy it. And then head over to your terminal. The install should be done now. And then run turbo app and then paste in the ID number. And this will connect your local source code to your project that you just created on Turbo. And then last but not least, run the dev server. And head over to your browser and run localhost 3000. You should see this, which means it worked. So on localhost, this is how the project looks. And before we get to the actual coding, let's do one more thing. Head over back to your terminal and do turbo deploy. And we're going to deploy to staging real quick just to make sure the environment works on staging as well as local. So when this is done, it'll give you a staging link right here where you can go and see if everything works on staging as well, which it does. So we're good to go. So everything works, we're all set to go. Let's go ahead and open up the code in your text editor and get started. So here is the code that's scaffolded from the Turbo CLI. What's important to understand here is that this is a standard Node Express project. using the mustache templating engine. So the index mustache file inside the views directory is the home page you were looking at when you run the dev server. The app.js is sort of the app manifest. This is where the routes are defined. So here, as you can see, we have two routes, the index route and the API route, which serves the pages. The index route serves the pages. So these are where the routes are connected, just like any other Node Express project. And these are where the paths are set. We are going to use both of these routes, but for now, the index route is the one that has our page, serves our pages. So if we open up the index route in the routes directory, you'll see a couple sample routes already set up for you. Let's get rid of all this so we can build it up from the bottom. And here, this route that I left behind is the one that's serving the home page, the one that shows up when we hit the base URL. This is a little bit sloppy. This should be ES6, so let's go ahead and just make that change. And then let's get rid of this stuff right here. Okay, so what's important to understand is that this word right here, index, is a direct reference to the index.mustache file. So if I had any other word here, like home or about, there has to be a corresponding mustache template in order for that page to render. So what we want to do next is add some data to the template. So let's say greeting, welcome to my restaurant. So here we have a data object, just a regular JSON object with one key called greeting that we can pass into the template, which we can then render dynamically on the template itself. So if we open up the index.mustache, right here where it says welcome to Turbo, instead of that, inside double braces, we can do greeting, which is the greeting key from this data object that we passed in right there. So if that works out, when we run the dev server, we should see that greeting on the home page. Oh, this is the staging environment, so localhost, and here it is. So it worked. That's good to go. So what we want to do now is, well, just for demonstration, let me actually add a couple more keys. So let's do description. This is a great place. Okay, so here we have another key inside the data object. So we can go back to our template and render that key instead of the hard-coded values. So now if I reload the home page, you'll see that text right there. So that's good to go. So everything worked out fine over there. So what we want to do next is figure out the structure here. So you may notice that these double braces are where the dynamic data is rendered. However, this one over here on line 3 is a little bit different. It has that caret right there. That's called a partial. So what that means is that this template, this placeholder right here, references another template entirely inside the partials directory. So if you open this up, you'll see a head.mustache. And that's what this is in reference to. So inside here is what the HTML actually renders. So if you look at this in the source code, you'll see the head tag is what's from the template file in the partials directory. And that's how that works. So we can use partials all over the site to render data or visual components that show up everywhere. And we'll definitely make good use of that. So what we want to do from here is now install a restaurant theme, a pre-fashioned theme that we can use to get some quick looking, nice looking UI, whereupon we can insert the restaurant content. So I'm going to use a theme that I already have right here called the restaurant theme. It looks like this. And if you're wherever you're watching this, I'll provide a download link on the tutorial page where you're watching this on turbo360.co or on the YouTube description section, depending on where you're watching this. So either way, you can download it from wherever you're watching this. So here's the theme we're going to use, which means we need to get this content over into our base project. So let's go ahead and get that process started. So download the theme from the link provided and then unzip it, and you should see this. And let's go ahead and start getting that content inside our project. So what we want to do first is let's create a duplicate just in case we make a mistake. Okay. Open up your theme and then open the index.html in your text editor and highlight the entire thing and copy it. And then head over to your project, and inside the index mustache, take out all of this, just remove all the contents, and paste in the content from the theme. And that's it, just copy it and paste it. Now if you run the dev server, and reload, it's going to look terrible, obviously, but the copy and paste worked. So let's go ahead and get everything working from a visual standpoint. So the next thing we need to do is port over the assets from the theme into our project. So if you open up the project right here, what's important to understand architecturally is that the static assets, the images, CSS, JavaScript files, etc., are all stored in the public directory. So that goes here. And inside the theme over here, we have CSS, fonts, images, JS, and a vendor directory. So we need to move all of this into all of that. So let's do it one at a time. Let's do CSS first. So open up the CSS files and just take all the files from the theme and move them in over here like that. And then go back here. The theme has a fonts directory, which our project does not, so we can just move that whole thing as is. Let's open up the images directory and do the same thing. Copy, move all the files from one to the other. Let's open up our JS directory and do the same thing. And the theme has a vendor directory, which ours does not, so we want to just move that whole thing over like that. And that brings over all the assets from the theme into our project. So what that means is now when we run the dev server, and reload the page, it should look like the theme originally looks, which it does. And that's great. So we're in business now. We have the theme and all the assets successfully ported over. Everything is working well, and we're good to go. And everything looks good. So now let's start cleaning this up and making it look a little bit more organized. So here is my, oops, wrong project. Here is the project. So first thing I want to do is get rid of all these sort of extra lines. Okay, and then let's do that. I'm going to reorganize these CSS imports. These are all CSS imports, so let's reorganize this and put it over here. It's not really important why I'm doing that, but the reason I did it is because all these vendor imports, I want to group them together. And these are basically a separate set of imports. So let's go ahead and make sure that didn't break anything. Looks good. And this is now our new head tag. So what we want to do is put that inside the partial like that and reference the partial instead, like so. Let's go ahead and take this and replace it with our new content. And now we have that head tag stripped out into its own partial. If we reload the page, everything should look the same. Cool, very good. Okay, don't worry about this. It's not that important for now. And then let's go down to the bottom, all the way to the bottom. We have another set of JavaScript imports that we need to do something similar for. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get rid of all these extra lines. And let's create a new partial for this. So cd to the partials directory inside the views folder. Let's create a new partial called imports. And let's take all that and put that inside the imports template. And then let's replace that here. So don't forget the caret because it is a partial. This back to the top div, that is this thing right here. I'm just going to get rid of that entirely. I've never been a fan of those things. So that's up to you if you want to keep it. I'm just going to get rid of it. But let's go ahead and test it now, make sure nothing broke. Okay, everything's still looking good. Now, it's important to understand that the whole point of partials is that to not have the same code in multiple pages, right? So anything that looks like it would show up in every page should have its own partial. So for example, if you go to the bottom, you'll see this footer. This footer is going to show up probably in every page. So let's go ahead and make that its own partial. So if you go to the bottom of the actual template, you'll see there's a footer tag from here to down to here. So that should be its own partial. So let's go ahead to cut that from the HTML and then go back to the partials directory. And let's create a footer.mustache partial. Let's go ahead and import that right now. And then let's paste that into here. And that should settle that. So if I reload the dev server, if I rerun the dev server and then reload the page, it's still there and it looks fine. So if I go to the top, you'll see that there's a nav bar, which is also going to be on every page. So let's go ahead and make a partial out of that. So we go to the partials directory again and create a, if we go to the top, you'll see it's called a header tag. So let's create a header partial. And let's grab that tag, that entire tag. And use that instead. And that will provide our header content. So let's just go ahead and make sure that still works. And very good, everything still works. So we are so far so good to go. Yeah, looks good. And great. So we have our project a little bit better organized. So let's go ahead and start. Let's see here. Okay, so what we want to do next is optimize the asset delivery. So here's what I mean by that. This is pretty important in terms of optimizing your websites. So what you want to do is take a look at the home page, specifically the source code. And what you'll see is on top, on the head tag, you'll see a series of CSS imports. In this case, specifically 12 imports, or 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 imports. What that means is it's making 11 individual requests to the web host for each one of these files, which is not really optimal. So what you want to do is create a task that will take all of these imports and combine them into one or maybe two, depending on how you want to organize it. In this case, I'm going to create two imports, one for the vendor CSS and one for just the regular CSS. And that way we'll go from 11 requests down to 2. So we're going to use Gulp for that. That's why we had to install Gulp earlier. So what we need to do now is create a series of Gulp tasks that will create those new files for us. So first thing we got to do is create a Gulp file in the root directory, the base directory. And here it is. Obviously it's empty because we just created it. And we need to import a few Gulp modules. So let me just do that from a separate project. Okay, we need to import these Gulp modules. So right now, pause the video and make sure you have exactly this on the imports, and then come back. So once you have that, we need to actually import those modules in the project itself. So it's pretty simple. We just go down that list. So npm i-d. Now notice here I'm using the D flag instead of the S flag. That means we're going to save these in the dev dependencies, which essentially means we're not going to deploy them with the project. We're just using them to write some scripts. Okay, so that's the first one. And then just go down the list and do what I'm doing right now. So it's pretty self-explanatory. And that should be it. We don't need to do this one, the path one, because it's already built in. It's a default module, so we can just leave that. And then if you open up the package.json, make sure you see those new Gulp modules inside here, otherwise it didn't work. So what we need to do now is write a series of tasks that will perform those functions I described a few minutes ago about taking the CSS files and combining them. So let's write our first Gulp task. I'm going to use this from our previous project again. So here is a Gulp task. CSS main. Okay, so right here, pause the video and do the same thing. Copy this and make sure you have exactly what we have here, and come back. Okay, so you should be done by now. When this task runs, it will take the CSS files and do what we said. It will minify, which means strip out all the extra spaces, extra enter, carriage returns, things like that. It'll get rid of all those extra white space. Don't worry about the auto prefixer. It'll concatenate all the files into one with this name and then place the output in this directory. So right here is where we have to define which files to do that for. So what we want to do is go back to the head tag and let's grab these three down here. Okay, these bottom three. And let's paste those right here. And we want to take these three files and concatenate and minify these three. So let's go ahead and make sure that that works. So again, if it does work, it'll create one file out of all three of these, a minified optimized file, and then put the results in this directory, public/dist/css. But you'll notice that that directory doesn't exist, so it'll create it for you if everything works. So let's run that task. So we do gulp css main. That's the name of the task. So there it is right here. Here's the file that was generated, and everything looks good. So let's go ahead and use that instead of the one in the head tag. So these three should now be replaced with dist css style.min.css, and we can get rid of those two. So that's good. So now we have one file where there used to be three. So let's go ahead and make sure nothing broke in the rendering process. Okay. It looks good, but there are a couple holes. You may notice that these social icons are missing. If you actually open up the terminal, you'll see that it's looking for the icons in the fonts directory. You see that? But that fonts directory was not copied over into the dist directory. So here's the fonts directory, and it has to be copied over into the dist directory. So what we need to do is create another task. Actually, I'll do it from the previous project again. It's a much simpler task, whose only job is to copy the fonts directory into the dist directory. That's why it's called copy fonts. So if we run that task, copy fonts, you'll see now the fonts shows up in the dist directory. So if we run the dev server, and these are now restored. So everything looks good. Don't worry about these for now. We will take care of that later. But the fonts are back, so everything looks back to normal. So that's good. So now what we really want to do, we notice how we have to run two tasks to make everything prepared. That's a little bit, that can just get pretty hard to remember. So what we want to do is create one task that covers both of those tasks. So I'm going to do that right here. Okay, so same as before. Let's pause the video and make sure you have this. And what's going on here is that we're creating another task, which is simply a sequence of two tasks. So we're doing this one first and then this one second, and that task is called style. So if I get rid of these folders, and I run gulp, this time I'm running gulp style, which is simply two tasks combined into one. You see we have the font and the CSS. So now we're good to go. And that should work when I run the dev server. And we're good to go. Everything looks good. So that covers that. So now I'm going to keep on going with these vendor imports. So let's go ahead and take care of these next. So we want to do CSS vendor. We want to call this vendor.min.css, and then we want to put that in the vendor directory. Right, to mirror this directory structure. So let's go ahead and grab these. And then let's do what we did before. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This process can be a little bit tedious, but luckily you only have to do it once, and then that's good for the entire project. It's also important to know how to do this because very often I have to go in here and make subtle changes, and you want to understand how the entire structure of the project is organized so that you're not afraid to make minor changes here and there. If you're not sure how things are arranged architecturally, making changes can be a very scary process, and you don't want that to be the case. So that's why I'm taking the time to do all this, because I want you to see how things are built all around, so that when you need to make changes for your own work professionally, you're not in a bad situation. So CSS vendor, let's go ahead and add this to the style task right away, like that. That way we can just keep on running the style task rather than running everything one at a time. Okay, and here it is. So dist vendor CSS and then vendor.min.css. So let's go ahead and import that. Dist vendor CSS and then vendor.min, and then hopefully we can get rid of these now. And let's see the home page now. Looks good. Everything looks good. So if we look at the source code, we now have 2 imports where we used to have 11. So that's a very, very substantial improvement. Everything is much more optimal there. These image imports, don't worry so much about. We will take care of that. But the CSS imports are in good shape. So that's good to go. Great. And let's see here. Okay, so what we want to do next is the same process. If you go back to the index.mustache file, all the way on the bottom, you'll see, oh, I'm sorry, we already took care of this. Inside the imports, we have a whole bunch of JavaScript imports for which we want to do the same thing. We want to strip those out into fewer requests. So we want to create tasks that will take care of these JavaScript imports the same way we did for the CSS. So also, one thing I forgot to point out is if you go to the source code and you click on these, you will see minified and concatenated code. So this is much more optimal in the delivery process when you make requests rather than making individual CSS requests. So this is considered a much more efficient way of delivering your assets. So that's good. Hopefully you got that working. I'm going to cut the video off here, and in the next video we're going to do the same process for these JavaScript imports, but in between it would be a good exercise if you tried it on your own first. That would be definitely a good thing to try and get a handle on. But no matter what, we'll do it in the next video first thing. So yep, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in video 2.